Can you tell us a little bit about your journey into private medical practice and what made you decide to take that leap?
Mainly because I like the independence. I like the fact that I am in charge of my own destiny. I could provide healthcare to patients as I choose fit, not restrained by the public sector. I think for me, it's about giving the highest quality of care using precise technology, things you can't necessarily do in the NHS, which I can do privately.
So, what were the biggest challenges that you faced with starting your own private medical practice and how did you overcome them?
I think the main challenge is no one really talks about private practice. You don't know where you're starting. You don't, and it's effectively you're going from a clinician's phase to a business minded phase. And that's not really something we taught in medical school or through the training of being a doctor. And this is one of the reasons why talking to people, getting in touch with allied healthcare, it's about getting access to knowledge which you're not familiar with. And I think for me, the biggest part is asking questions. That's how I've managed to overcome my hurdles.
What are the key elements that contribute to a successful private medical practice from a business perspective?
I think there are two parts. I think visibility is one. I think it's important for people to know that you exist. I mean, it's quite interesting from an advertising point of view. It's not something I've ever done before. So, engaging with technology, engaging with feedback apps such as Doctify, where patients who've had my experience could actually, give real-time feedback to other potential patients. I think that's one aspect, getting that visibility. The other one is about your credibility as a surgeon. And that's about building credibility amongst your peers. And for me, I've got 18 publications. I'm dual fellowship trained. I've been through a competitive, competitive process to get to where I am. It's about getting the 18 publications, the book chapters, about doing international presentations, being a part of the global visiting surgeon program where people from other countries come to watch me operate. That's for me, building credibility amongst your peers is just as important as visibility because it's credibility and trust is a compound effect. And that will last the length of time. Brief likes will disappear tomorrow. So for me, it's about two things. It's about building that credibility as a surgeon at the forefront of change at the same time as getting the visibility.
So, how do you balance providing excellent medical care and surgical care with the demands of running a business?
I think, putting the patient at the center of management is the way forward and building my clinical practice around there. I think where the business element comes in is how does it improve my clinical practice? That's what it boils down to. How can I provide a better high quality care? So with private practice, I provide more time for my patients. With private practice, I could provide the latest technology for my patients, the most up-to-date care. It's not about doing one or the other. It's about how one complements the other. And I think that's, for me, that's the key of how to bring the business in. It's not a case of clinical practice versus the business, but how does the business practice amplify my clinical practice?
Yeah, absolutely. What strategies have you used to grow your medical practice and attract more self-pay patients?
I think so far I've depended on two different aspects. Firstly, building my reputation as a clinician. So this means engaging in research, getting my publication out there, presenting at a global stage. That's important because that is a bedrock from which you can market yourself. How do I differentiate that from other aspects? I'm still engaged with my time in the army. It's something I'm passionate about. It's something I want people to know about. And in terms of from the marketing perspective, using LinkedIn, Doctify, engaging with local physiotherapists, engaging with local GP practices, just to get my name out there in a larger field. But one of the things which I've realized is that the world's moved on and it's about engaging with online technology. And this is one of the reasons why I approached Allied Healthcare Media. It's because the world has moved on. You need an online presence. And, for me, that's the direction forward.
So, how do you handle the financial side of your private medical practice? And do you have any tips for managing cash flow or perhaps maximizing profitability?
I think in the first instance, when you start off, try and do as much yourself as you can. And I know a lot of people say avoid doing that. But, for example, booking your own clinics, writing your own letters, transcription, billing, it's important to understand these before you outsource it. Because at some point, if something's wrong, you need to be able to understand the processes. It also improves the cash flow because if you're doing more yourself, you're not spending that money on asking someone else to do it for you. So, in terms of, what do I do in terms of outsourcing? The only real outsourcing I do right now, it would be with billing and invoices because it's an aspect which I now understand. But as my practice grows, it's something I would want someone else to take over that aspect. Similarly, with the advertising aspect, it's one thing me actually going and visiting GPs and physiotherapists, but to get a broader appeal online, this is what, part of the reason why I would engage with an online technology company is because you have to stay ahead with technology. It's reflected in my role as in my NHS as a technology lead. So for me, it's important to do that in the private practice as well as in the NHS. So for cash flow, I suggest do more yourself, except that you're going to be running at a loss at the beginning with the aim of picking things up later down the line. Understand how the tax system works. Part of this, get a good accountant. Because you need to know what you can offset against tax and what you can't.
I want to talk about like AI stuff now, because obviously that's moving into the future. How has technology such as artificial intelligence impacted your private medical practice?
In terms of private medical practice, it's one of those aspects where you realize that in terms of advertising, engaging with companies which have AI at the heart of it makes more sense than a traditional model. It's about being able to amplify yourself to a larger audience. But this is also reflected in my actual NHS practice because I'm actually the Divisional Clinical Innovation Officer for clinical support, which means that I'm the clinical lead for ambient AI. I'm the clinical lead for introducing AI as part of triaging, as part of converting discharge summaries to formal letters using AI instead of a doctor's. So AI brings in efficiencies, and that should be reflected not just in the private sector, but in the public sector as well. And I think by engaging in both, it's important for me to stay ahead of the curve.
Do you see any upcoming trends in the medical field that will actually shape the future of private practice?
I think a lot of medical professionals are underestimating the impact of AI in healthcare. So, for example, one of the projects I'm working on is about creating an informatics database for robotic knee replacements. Right now, the vast majority of the country, the surgeon still uses a tradition from 20 years ago. In my practice, I use robotic knee replacements where I can recreate your knee onto a virtual screen and then decide where the implant's going to go and decide how much bone's being cut before making a single cut. The direction I see things traveling is at some point I'll have a patient coming in with a certain demographic, a certain age, and a certain alignment, i.e., how they stand. And AI will say, for these patients, based on the data we have on outcomes, they will benefit from this personalized option. And I don't think people realize how much of an impact that's going to have over the next 5-10 years.
What steps do you take to ensure a positive experience in your private practice for patients the moment they walk in?
I think most of this has been informed by my experience as a relative and as a patient. I think, the way I practice is based on how I would want to be treated or how I want my, elderly mother to be treated. Actually, up, approaching them with a smile, a firm handshake, letting them know that they are in good, safe hands. I make sure, above all, I listen to the patient. I purposely keep my consultations to about half an hour at the very least and accept that there might be overrun because it's important to take every single detail into account. A lot of the time, I've realized through training, based on what I've seen, that patients come in with knee pain and they're assuming that they need a knee replacement. Well, the truth is, when you actually ask them where exactly their pain is and you try and focus in on it, that doing a knee replacement might not be the answer they're looking for. And it's about giving them options. And it's about shared decision making. I think the days of doctor knows best has been replaced by shared decision making. It's about giving patients the options, giving them the risks, the benefits, and then letting them decide and supporting them through their journey. Giving, just like you go through the complications of surgery, it's important to actually let them know that if they choose to have you looking after them, that is your responsibility that they're okay from point A to point B. And that's not just for the patients, it's for the relatives as well. Because they need to know that there is someone with them throughout the journey and it doesn't end with the surgery. But going forward, it doesn't matter, if it's 1-2 years down the line, if they have concerns, they have a go-to point.
What is the long-term vision for your medical practice? And do you plan to perhaps expand or introduce new services in the future?
I think for me, it would be to have eventually open a Harley Street clinic, build up my reputation within Harley Street amongst the Chelsea area, as well as the Chiswick area and Richmond. But I think in terms of clinical practice, for me, down the line, I hope to introduce a robotic revision knee surgery into the private sector. While you do get revision knee surgeons, you don't really get robotic revision knee surgeons performing in the private sector. I think I would like to take it down the route of dual consultant operating. I think if, it's about building a vision where people collaborate more, and not just amongst surgeons, but with nutritionists, with physiotherapists. It's about giving the patient the holistic approach and to, move into areas like, how do you preserve the knee joint? How do you stop someone having an operation? The operation doesn't have to be the first point. It should be the last resort when everything else is tried. It's about giving them the holistic management. The brand I'm developing is Medicine in Motion. It's about preserving motion. It's about allowing people to have their life back. And that doesn't necessarily mean with surgery. So over time, I hope to develop relationships with nutritionists, with physiotherapists, with primary healthcare physicians to give patients that holistic approach to help them get their life back. Think of the long-term futures. For me, it's not about the 8-month contract. It's about the next 5-10 years, developing that over time, aging with different products you have once I have a better cash flow going. Because I know that you've got a lot more to offer, but it's about getting that first initial step, getting that first 75 to 100K under the belt flowing, and then at least I can reinvest that.